Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on one of my more unusual systems. My typical systems just have a bunch of bedding, some worms added, we feed, try to create worm castings, try to break down our household waste responsibly, but sometimes I set up these experimental systems, and this is one of those. It's a system where I had captured a whole bunch of what I refer to as castings boulders. So like my screen down here, the screen has 1/4 inch mesh. Anything not big enough or anything not small enough to pass through was captured, and I had a whole bunch of the stuff, enough to start a new system into which we placed a bunch of worms. Not even that big of a bunch. 134 was the estimated worm count in there, although now on day 212, we're pretty sure that we've seen many more worms in there than just 134. And I guess the other oddity here is that we're just doing a slightly different feeding pattern than in most systems. Usually I just feed down the middle. Here we've been alternating the side of the bin onto which we place the feeding each time, going back and forth, calling it ping pong feeding. So today they're due for feeding number 17 on day 212. I'm going to get the system up on the bench, slip on a glove, and we're going to get to work. This little box of random debris has sort of turned into what we use as our feeding zone indicator to show it's on this side of the bin that we last fed, although I'm sure once we remove the covers it'll be evident which part of the bin was where we put their last feeding. Those of you that have been following the castings boulders bin here might remember that for the longest time there was this piece of paper resting on top to allow that translucent piece of plastic cover to do its own job, but it wasn't doing a good job blocking out light. So on top of the plastic rested this piece of basically paper bag, brown paper bag paper. Basically its only function was shade to allow no light to pass down into the system. Even though the plastic is kind of translucent and blocks some of the light, it still allows light in. So my guess is that the worms appreciated having a darkened space, which they no longer have, because once you remove the plastic, now you're down into the worm bin already. And I'm sure that this piece of paper was glad to finally get down into the worm bin after just resting out on top of the plastic, never participating in any of the reindeer games down here. What is with this thing? This looks like such a... yeah, it's a germinating seed popping out of its seed, looking desperately for some material to stick its roots into. But it was just sitting out there on the surface. How unusual. This one over here, I guess, figured out which way is up, right? But I guess the ultimate end for anything that tries to grow in your worm bins is basically it turns into worm food. Alright, let's get down to seeing how things look in here. The ping pong feedings mean we're not feeding on this side, but before we head over to give them their feeding, we'll usually start over here to inspect how they did with the last feeding. But before we get sidetracked, I'm going to sprinkle in some of this mosquito dunks. You might notice that little flying insect that was just kind of blatantly walking around right in front of my face as if I wasn't even here, disrespectfully. I think we might have actually added some of this stuff in recent past check-ins too, noticing a little bit of flying insect activity. So hopefully we can undo what the little flying insects are trying to do here, which is make themselves at home. Now, what I've been doing was gathering up anything large enough to be just pulled out as either leftover bedding or leftover food substance. Like here's the peel of a banana. Nice big chunk of food, which after 12 days you wouldn't really expect to be gone yet. Part of it, yeah, but the whole thing, no way. Take the wormies quite some time to make that vanish entirely. At various stages, soft stuff will go quick, but tougher, more fibrous parts of the banana peel, like the stem specifically, will take a little longer. There's our little flying insect friend again. Shoo! This looks like tomato skin. So now I don't have to go crazy here picking out every last bit, but it is kind of nice to remove anything from this side of the bin at this point that might cause worms to want to just camp out and not get on the move looking for better stuff. We don't want worms camping out over here. We want them following our lead, which is go to where the food is, right? And at some point in the near future, getting that behavior down will be to our benefit. When we want to try to relocate the worms and move them on, we'll just repeat these tactics of putting the food into a specific place where we'll eventually round up the wormies and move them on. There's another stem of a banana. So a lot of this food is taking on the same color as the surrounding material. And it is kind of nice going through the feeding zone in this system, because here I get to feel recently created castings, nice and small and loose, just like you would expect. And then I get the reality check. I start working my way across, and that's when I start to encounter the boulders. So we will make our way across, gently nudging material over to give ourselves space on the opposite side to put in today's feeding. We've been committing to not just looking at the boulders anymore, but actually attempting to break them up. And it does seem like we're making progress with that to some degree. The material does, in general, feel a lot more fine. I don't feel like I'm just rolling my hands around in a bucket full of marbles. It does feel like what I'm doing right here, these grinding down and breaking up of the boulders during each check-in is working it down slowly. I think just by spreading that work out across multiple check-ins prevents me from feeling like I'm going to have to sit here for an hour picking out boulders and crushing them individually, making me wonder why didn't I bring down my nutcracker from the kitchen. But yeah, no, I think what we've been doing in terms of trying to help these boulders break down has been helping some. But you know, I'm not trying to win some sort of a county fair for the nicest vermicompost. This was just an experiment. This was really just to see if the worms could do anything with these boulders, and I believe that we've already answered that question over all these weeks and months in service here, and the answer to that was pretty much not a lot that they can do with it, I would imagine, you know. So something a little tougher, like the worm farmer's hand, is needed to break these things up. But when they went in here, they were hard as rocks. They were completely dry, and I guess the only first step you could follow is to give them time to hydrate so that you can actually break them apart in your hands. Some of the stuff I encounter is not boulders. This is the seed or pit from something. I'm not sure what. I guess from the size I might assume that it's a plum. And those are the sorts of things I exclude. Yesterday I found a peach pit in one of my systems. And there's something about the plum pit too. I think I remember fishing one out recently, making me wonder, well, aren't there others? It's hard to believe that there's just this one. So at day 212 here, we do, I think, need to start looking ahead, because other systems of mine eventually get to the point where I stop adding bedding in the hopes that worms will just focus on whatever residual bedding still, you know, remains in the system, and break all that stuff down to give us some really nice fine material. So I call that foraging, allowing them at least from a bedding perspective, to be foraging. I don't force foraging in terms of food supply, because I do come back as regularly as I always do to give them their next meal. It's only without bedding towards the end, but we haven't done that here, obviously. And I guess the other systems of mine, a little bit older than this one here, started foraging around day 230, I believe. Here at day 212, we are only a couple weeks away from reaching that age where I guess if we were going to keep pace with what the other systems are doing in terms of when to switch into that preparatory mode, trying to get ready for harvest, well, maybe it's time to start thinking about doing the same here. But since we're not there yet, today I was super generous with the bedding over there, perhaps a little bit more so than I have in the past here. I mean, I know for sure because in this system in the past, I do remember in the very beginning, my assumption was that I was going to give them virtually no bedding. I gave them little bits of sort of haven bedding, just a place to retreat to if in fact they're just finding it impossible to get by in the castings boulders. But the castings boulders were always meant to be their home, stuff that they would occupy and break down for us. Oops. But somehow they just didn't seem to take that much of a shine to this stuff. And I mean, can you blame them? Alright. That is a pretty good size feeding, you know. And if we were still talking about the population of worms less than 200, I don't think we'd be feeding so much. So I think just by the evidence of seeing how much food they're able to go through in the period of less than 2 weeks over the past 12 days, I think is clear evidence to show us that the population has grown. And at some point when we move them on, we'll go through that exercise of trying to estimate how many wormies we have here. Because at that time we'll do our best to try to isolate them from the surrounding materials, get a good look at them, even try to get a good look at them while we're in the process of collecting them, and then with everyone's help we come up with these estimated worm count numbers, which I always find very fun and interesting to do. So I wondered about this top piece of paper. It did seem like it was getting super fragile. I thought about throwing it into the feeding zone as supplementary bedding, but then I kind of took pity on it and I figured, you know what, let's let this little guy remain one more round down here before getting obliviated. I'm not sure if that's a word, it just doesn't sound right. Maybe it is. Blasted into oblivion. I have a feeling that that's where this piece of paper is going to be next time we come back in here, if we even recognize it as still being here. But that's it for our check-in now with the European night crawlers on day 212, getting feeding 17 in the castings boulders bin. Still getting bedding, but I think we might be foraging soon. Tell me if you agree. If you do, then we will be switching to that mode soon, withholding bedding, giving them feedings only, trying to give them time to make this stuff really beautiful, work down fine stuff, and then eventually we're working on getting them out of there. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.